Set up Twitch real quick here. That should all work. Let's check this out. Okay, testing audio. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Seems reasonable. Excellent. Okay, we're gonna get started. So yesterday, that's not true. Last stream, which was not yesterday, we left off taking a look at the Behringer Ultra Voice UV1, and that is on the desk here. And we're going to keep taking a look at this. So I went ahead and I have the driver installed now, and I also have it hooked up. I've not set anything up on it yet, so we will do that in this portion of the stream. And I just kind of realized that it might be nice to be able to show the top-down view here, so I'm going to endeavor to do that. I kind of wonder if this tablet stand might feasibly hold this. Okay. It's a little bit wackadoodle, but I think that might work. So we will give that a shot. So currently, as I clip there, we are on a Rode NT1 running into a Zoom H5, which is a portable recorder. If I slide a few things, you might actually be able to see that. So that's right there. It has an XY stereo capsule on the end. I don't want to move it too much because the micro, I think it's even mini USB, not even micro USB plug is finicky. And we may do a video at some point replacing that with a Type-C plug. That's a popular fix for older hardware because that microphone's probably always going to be with me. I don't think it's in a place where it can be resold. The soft touch got really sticky on it, and then I tried to remove that to the bare plastic, and it didn't 100% remove. So it's nasty looking, but it still works. I've used it for 10 years, if not longer, and it can run a microphone that requires phantom power off of 2 AA batteries for a decent length of time, which is not necessarily something that you would understand. Hey! Yeah! I'm glad to be live again as well. Thanks for dropping in. Now let me get your name straight, because I've heard it before, but it has been a little while since I've seen you on stream. So how do you pronounce your name? Is it just Uchiha? Is that what you prefer? Is it kind of as it sounds, or okay, Uchiha? Perfect. All right, that works for me. So yeah, if you missed the first little bit, we're looking at some audio equipment that I ran out of time to look at on the last stream. So if you're at all interested in kind of the setup and what different things I find important, that's what I'll be talking about. And then we've got a big box behind me to open up, which is something that's very exciting to me. We'll have to see if it's exciting to other people. And then I think we also have another microphone to test out, in addition to my main microphone, which is that one. Not this one. This is my old one, which I bought that one to replace this one to sell it. And I'm a gear hoarder. I like having things to compare with, so we still have it. But we're going to go ahead and start setting this up, and I'll hopefully be able to do this kind of live. And I think my goal is to plug this mic into there, change OBS over to capturing from this, and then also changing my audio out to this channel strip. And I'm hoping that won't be too jarring for anybody. So in preparation for that, I'm going to grab a 1/4 inch adapter to 3/8 adapter, which is just the bigger audio plug that is still very standard. Actually, if I get out of frame, you might be able to see that. Yay! So there is that. So I'll leave that plugged in for now. I think it would be good. I think what we'll do, if I just plug that in, so I'm going to set, maybe we do it as a secondary microphone, and I could mix between or fade between potentially, but that may not work. So why don't I first get my audio transferred? So I'm going to pull this out. We'll plug that in, so you should still be able to hear me just fine. I just need to go into Windows and change my output, which of course defaulted to something else. And then I will need to find an audio source. So I will go, of course my keyboard is the most out of the way that it could be. So let me bring that back, and we'll go to mynoise.net. I love talking about this website. I don't know if anybody else really knows about it all that much, but this is a fantastic website. These people go out and get extremely clean audio recordings of nature. Let's say they do a whole bunch of different things, but let's stick to nature as an example. And it's a waterfall. Well, they don't just get a recording near the waterfall. They actually go out and they get recordings of a bunch of things around the waterfall, like the different elements. Like you might have a water trickle through some rocks near the shoreline. You might have trees nearby. The close recording of the waterfall, and then maybe a mist sound. They get it all. And then they present that to you with this interface. And this interface is each individual sound that can be animated. It can be adjusted to your preference. And this is just one of an absolute ton of different recordings that they have. So if you need help studying and you need some white noise, they have different beats, tones, and then all these different environments as well. It's really, really impressive. So I'm going to turn up my output here, which I'm either hearing static or I'm actually hearing don't think I'm actually getting out. Got it. So this is just for me to set up my audio levels, and I think I've been blasting the waterfall sounds for the last little bit at basically full volume. So who knows if anything there was understood or intelligible. But this website is absolutely fantastic. I use this Irish Coast setting to fall asleep somewhat frequently. And you can set up slider animation, so it will slowly modulate all of these different inputs, and it will create an ever-changing sound environment for you, which is absolutely fantastic. That is mynoise.net. I also use it when I'm testing speakers, typically. Just a clean reference to go through, but they have all kinds of different environments, sound therapy. I find the binaural beats to be very interesting. It requires headphones for it to function, but they can simulate frequencies that we can't hear by using the dissonance between other frequencies. And it is thought that certain frequencies below our hearing interact with certain mental states. And it's fascinating how you can listen to some of those and it may all be placebo, but you do feel certain emotions or certain mental states, depending on what it says, but it could all be placebo. But I think that's really, really fascinating how that works. So that was an audio test that hopefully didn't get too incredibly scuffed, but we'll swap back to the both cams, and I'll hop back in chat. There we go. So I need to keep an eyeball on my monitor, on my levels here. Very good. I do have a fan on in the background. I wish it was just to test background noise removal, but it definitely isn't. It is a little bit toasty in here. So let me double check my filters, and I have no audio filters set up currently. So these will just be raw audio takes from the various microphones. So you should be able to hear the differences with the different knobs and things that I'm adjusting. Okay, so now we've got my headphones set up, so I can actually hear what needs to be heard. Now we're going to swap this microphone over to this audio interface. So I will go dark for just a moment, and then we're going to start dialing it in. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Check, check. And just for my sanity, I do have the correct input. It does seem to be working. I'm seeing levels all match across, but I will just double check on the stream side to make sure it's not some random microphone that's connected. Perfect. We are all good. Levels are a little bit low, but that's perfectly okay because that's what we're working with here. Okay, so this is a channel strip. I believe it is analog, but don't quote me on that. I actually haven't figured that part out yet. I would prefer if it was analog, because the DBX286 that I have upstairs is an analog channel strip, and I have a belief that the fact that it is analog is giving that microphone, and probably any microphone, a particular sound that I didn't realize I had been looking for since the dawn of time. So I'm very excited to take a look at this and see if this is comparable, because if you didn't catch the last stream where we looked at this Behringer, or Behringer, potentially, I have not, also have not figured out the brand name 100%. This product is $100 or more less than my DBX 286, and the 286 is like under $300, more than $200, kind of that price range, which for a channel strip is very affordable already. But it does not have a USB, or it does not have an audio interface built in. It does not have a power button. And there's a couple other things that I think this throws in feature-wise. The audio input being at the front may or may not be to your preference. I believe the DBX286, it plugs into the back. That may or may not work for you. So the 286 has to go from its output into a something to actually capture the audio and put that back onto the computer. So I have an audio interface for that. Well, that audio interface adds a degree of cost, because I think it costs as much or more than the DBX286 by itself. And the only real value add to that audio interface is it has a vintage compressor emulator, which kind of warms up the sound and gives it a little nice quality. But it's really not, it doesn't do as much leg work as the 286. It does have other functions as well that I don't use it for. But it's an additional piece of hardware that if I could clear up my desk and just have this, I would be ecstatic. So this is my test to compare the Behringer, we'll call it both, the Behringer Ultra Voice UV1 to the DBX 286. And I forget the brand that is under. But here we go. So you've been listening to it, just the raw output. The only thing we have adjusted is, obviously, we've given the Rode NT1 phantom power. And we've adjusted the gain to a little bit less than plus 45, so that we're sitting in an audible range. We may get a little bit closer to the microphone, or we may increase that a little bit further. However, some of these other settings that we adjust will affect the gain. So we will see. One thing I've noted is that I do not hear this microphone in my headphones. I likely need to adjust this mix knob. I'm going to do that now just to see. And I do, if I slide all the way to the in, then I do have, I can hear this. Now, these headphones are open back, so it's not very loud to me, but it is zero latency. So that is really, really nice to have. My audio interface upstairs has direct monitoring. So the signal that comes in is output and mixed in at the touch of a button. It looks like on this, I do have to mix it myself, and I will need to figure out how I can balance that, because I did have the waterfall sound in the background, and I had to roll this all the way to the PB Not perfectly sure what that stands for. And now to hear myself in the headphones, I have to swap all the way over to the N. So monitoring this could get a little bit interesting. So if I turn up the volume there, I could probably find somewhere in between, just in case I have any sounds over there. Since these are open back headphones and they aren't studio or monitoring headphones, there will be some sound leak from the headphones, so I'll try to avoid that. But let's continue on. So we have a low cut function, which if I get kind of close to the microphone and I enable that, that is going to cut the signals below 80 hertz. And that may or may not be beneficial to you. The next button we have is a process bypass. If I enable that now, nothing happens because we have no processes going on. Our first process here is going to be the compressor. The drive is going to essentially be how much compression is applied. And then the density is like the length that the compressor is active for, as far as I understand. And to set this up, I believe you set your drive fairly high. So this probably sounds fairly unnatural, where the background of the fan is kind of cutting in and out as I speak, because the compressor is reducing the sound that's coming in above the threshold that I've applied in this case. But I have done this so that I can set the timing of it, which would be the density. So as I talk and then I stop, you may be able to see these lights here as they tick back off, as the density, the compressor is basically being released. And I'm probably going to set this quicker, and I'm going to watch this dial. I want it to almost go all the way off, kind of in between words, but I don't want it to sound unnatural. So I want it to come on quickly, and I want it to turn off relatively quickly. So I've settled around 7. Now we'll dial back the drive, and I'm looking for a little bit of reduction as I speak louder, and we may settle in kind of around, is that 4-ish? Now, as you add compression, you are reducing the peaks, and I believe the drive adds in makeup gain, and makeup gain lifts the bottom of your levels in effect, and it fills the space that has been taken by what you've reduced at the top. So you effectively lift the lower levels of your audio because you have compressed the top. So you just shift everything, you squish it, and then you shift it back up, and that gives the volume modulation more consistency. There's not as much dynamics there, and that is okay because you want to be easier to hear in many cases. But one side effect of this is now the noise in the background has been picked up more. So it's a fine balance to play with and figure out. So that's the compressor. I'm fairly happy with what I have there for now. And we'll move on to the de-esser. I believe my particular S's sit around 4,000 hertz, and that is dependent person to person. I think 4,000 is actually kind of on the low end of the frequency range, but I think it's like 4 to 8, somewhere in there. And the S's are the sounds that you make when you are speaking with S's, typically S's and C's. It's that kind of whistling sound. So as I turn up this threshold, you'll hear this kick in. Now it's very aggressive with how I have it set right now, to where it's almost like it gets quiet like instantly, and that's not very natural. So as I tune this a little bit more, I'm going to dial this back, and I'm kind of watching this indicator here, this decibel reduction meter, and I don't think I want both of these lights to activate. I'm going to try to find a threshold that's actually going to be more in this green and less in this red. 1 decibel of reduction is our green, 6 decibels of reduction is our red. So I've settled on actually a fairly low value. I'm at about 1.5, and I think I'm going to sit there for now. Now let's look at the enhancer, and this setting on my other microphone, on my other interface, has given a really incredible effect. And that was primarily with the high frequency detail, the HF detail. But we're going to take a look at this LF detail. So as I dial this up, you should hear a little bit more bass and a little bit more warmth get introduced into this microphone. And you can dial that as you wish. This would be, as I've dialed it up here, extremely boomy. It is altering my voice significantly. It may or may not be pleasant. I don't typically prefer it boosted this much. I'm probably going to settle more in the 4, where it's just starting to bring in kind of a new flavor, but it's not going absolute ham with it. I personally feel like I have a decent low end to my voice, so I don't want to overdo it and overwhelm with that. It's a fine balance. If maybe your voice had less lower register and you wanted to simulate that or improve it a little bit, that's where you may use the low frequency detail more. But I am curious how the high frequency detail comes in. So we're going to dial this up and keep talking here a little bit. And you can hear the top end sounds start to kind of open up. So the sounds get a little bit brighter. The sibilances are a lot more prevalent, but it kind of picks up some of the, I don't know if brittleness in my vocal range, but it gives it maybe a little bit more grit, and I do really like that. On this other microphone, on this other interface, it was that dial that really gave it the quality that I liked. It kind of brightened up a relatively dark microphone. So I'm going to dial this back a little bit, because this microphone in particular is very sensitive to that type of detail. So I really don't want to overdo it. And we do also have a fan in the background that has now, probably as I go through this, become more and more prevalent. Now we have an expander / gate, and to me this is more or less a noise gate. For specific settings, I'm really not particularly sure, but I will probably set a ratio maybe in the middle here, and then we're going to dial up the threshold. So we're right on the cusp there, where the background noise is just barely peeking through, so I would want to go a little bit higher than that. So now as I am quiet, there is no more output from the microphone. And if my voice doesn't break over that threshold, like if I sit maybe somewhere back here and I'm kind of just mixed into the background of the audio, it won't work very well. It'll sound very choppy, almost clippy as I get dropped out there. But your ratio can help you with that. So if I dial this down a little bit and I move back, So now I'm kind of just in the background here. I actually prefer that quite a bit. So the threshold is going to essentially be a dial of how aggressive the expander gate is. And I kind of like where it's sitting right now, where it's not too aggressive, but it does definitely duck the background audio when I stop talking. That is a great thing to use if I brought anything up on screen and we were watching something, playing video, whatever, playing a game. If I stop talking, I don't need any background noise getting mixed into what's getting sent to you guys. So I've kind of set it at a conservative level there. Now our last effect here, let's say, is your gain output. And this is a makeup adjuster. So we've set our initial gain. We had fairly decent levels, which I can hit this process bypass and we can take a look at it. I think I may actually adjust this higher because we're really looking for a range that's going to be maybe pushing into this +6, maybe hovering around the 0. I'm actually not 100%. I think they want you to target 0 here, but typically a decibel scale is 0 is clipping 100%. And so I think they want you to speak kind of at the 0 range, and that may be scaled to like -12, which if I show you here on OBS, you can see on OBS here, 0 would be clipping. So if I shouted really loud and it got through all the processing here, you would hear my voice getting cut off at that 0 level. Nothing above that volume would get transmitted to you. So it's because the sine waves get cut off, you hear clipping. That's the effect that is caused there. And I don't need to be this loud to you guys. So I could adjust my output gain down. However, we've turned off all the processing here. So I'm a little bit happier with the volume that I've set here, the gain, the initial gain. So let's actually dial off the compressor. And I think everything else should be relatively okay. The compressor is probably the primary effector of the output volume. So we'll turn the process bypass back off. And now we have no compression. So looking back at my levels here on OBS, we have a decent output. We're kind of hovering in the green there. So let me put this back on since I didn't really demonstrate anything, but I was referencing the levels here initially, and I turned my process bypass on so I could ignore everything downstream. And I dialed this back up until we were speaking around this 0 or so, picking up a little bit to +6 and holding in around there. And I think this has been rescaled where clipping would traditionally be yellow and everything would be negative. Sorry, clipping would be 0 and everything would be negative from there. And you'd be talking around the -12 range or so, as I was showing on OBS. So I think that's how they've scaled it. And it might just be more of a consumer use thing, but that's subjective relatively. Like you obviously don't want to clip. That's a well-known fact, but to what levels you actually want to speak at, there's a range, but it's not set in stone necessarily. It's not a hard and fast rule. You can tweak that as you need, just like anything in here. So we have our process bypass turned off. So we are hearing the de-esser enhancer, the gate, and any output adjustment gain at the end here. So why don't we turn our compressor back on and listen to the effect it's having. So it is lifting our levels a lot quicker than it had been. And I'm still pretty happy with the release time here, the density. So we're just looking for a level that as I'm talking, we're not really reducing a whole lot unless I get a little bit louder. So I've settled in. I think that's going to be right around 3. Now I'm going to leave the de-esser alone, the enhancer. I might look at this expander now because we've essentially raised all of our levels. I can hear the fan in the background kind of on the edge, clipping through a little bit, just over that threshold, so I'm going to adjust this. I've raised my threshold a little bit to give a little bit of margin above the background sound. We may need a tiny bit more. And now looking at the ratio, I'm going to sit back a ways here and talk as if I moved a little bit farther from the microphone, and I don't want that to be completely inaudible. So if I turn up my ratio too much, I could potentially get onto the edge of where it cuts in and cuts out like I am now. And I may prefer to have that effect weakened a little bit so that if I am talking a little bit softer, I'm not getting cut off so harshly. I also think the ratio might be a compound effect where it's applying more reduction the higher you go, as well as acting faster. And that doesn't sound very natural to me. It sounds like you're on a phone call even, or Zoom, let's say. So I'm going to dial this back to a range that feels a little bit more natural, lets a little bit more through. I'll kind of double check by moving to a different spot. If I was grabbing a box from the shelf and I was still yelling at the microphone. And that's kind of an initial setup here that I am actually really, really happy with. And I think there is some decent hope for my other microphones. So, looking at our last settings here, this mix is looking to be really neat. So, there's 2 knobs that are going to impact things here, and you want to use them together is what I'm kind of getting from playing with this a little bit. If I slide this all the way to the inside, the in function or the label there, I am incredibly loud to myself in the headphones, and I may want that to very, very directly monitor my input, but I don't need that in this case. If I slide this all the way to the right, I have a 100% mix of whatever is playing on the desktop. So if I was playing a game, for instance, but I probably don't need all desktop. I want to hear a little bit of how this is sounding, especially now for setting up this microphone. So what you can do is, I would say, go all the way to desktop, the PB side, and dial it back until you have enough input from your microphone that you can tell what's going on. You can tell if the microphone stops or if a level gets bumped. And then I will adjust the volume over here, the level, as well. And the level is affecting this for the microphone output. So that's a little bit confusing. I kind of thought, it makes sense, but I thought the level would affect the desktop for some reason. And I could just raise and lower the desktop, and then I could change the mix, and then gain would be its own thing. But it looks like you would play a little bit. So let's say we had a 50% mix, and if I play something on the desktop, it would be probably incredibly loud. We'll go back to mynoise.net. Actually, why don't we do... We'll pull up a video on YouTube. We'll do one of mine. So we have a short that we did recently. So you know that weird EVF that you could get on AliExpress? So that's a decent level. And if I adjust my microphone back the way that kind of makes sense, I've now moved a little bit more towards the desktop volume. I'll play this again. And it's just this goofy
It's a goofy product, enormously heavy duty looking.
So that ended up being a little bit too loud to me. So I turned it down, and now the headphone mix is a little bit quiet. So I will turn that back towards the side that inputs that, and you can just play back and forth as it makes sense. But that is incredibly useful to have because I do not have to have a separate audio interface to do that with. Right now upstairs, that interface sits on top of the DBX286, which is perfectly fine, but now I have even more things on my desk. Technically, this is a rack mount part, and so is the DBX286. So you could absolutely set those wherever you want, and even build a rack or get a rack and rack mount those. It is worth noting this is single channel as well. The DBX286 is. I don't know 100% if this is. I assume that it is because it is a channel strip. I believe those are single channel, so one mono channel like this microphone. However, let's say I had an audio output from this stereo XY pair on my Zoom H5, and I had that going in here. That could be very interesting because people may want to have that, but this is a single input device, and I don't believe XLR is stereo capable with just the 3 pins. I may be showing my lack of audio knowledge there, and I'm sure somebody is well more versed than I am there. But as we have this set up, I'm very excited and very happy about this. Looking at OBS's levels, I'm probably blasting your ears a little bit too much, so I'm actually going to turn down the gain output so that my output gain is in a little bit better threshold. I'm kind of shooting in to speak into the yellow just a little bit, so I'm hovering kind of in the -16 or 17 range, though I can get very loud, but that gives me a little bit more headroom, and it's still a pleasant volume for you guys, and I can adjust everything as needed. Let me pop back over to chat here. So we have set up the Rode NT1 on this. I would love to set up the RE20 next, but I'm going to save that for last to kind of keep me motivated, because that microphone on this interface, if it's doing the same things that it's doing to the Rode NT1, I have high hopes for it. But one big concern is, will the gain be able to drive the RE20 at a reasonable level? The RE20 is a dynamic microphone. Dynamic microphones are self-powered, so the actual physical movement of the diaphragm generates the electric signal that is translated by whatever interface you have, but those levels are very low. As would make sense, speaking is not, the energy in a voice is not very high, but a condenser microphone, a cardioid. Am I mixing up my terms? Dynamic and cardioid. To Google. I always get those two mixed up, and I want to make sure I am speaking clearly here. Okay, so a condenser microphone has power provided to it. There is a diaphragm that is excited by the voice, and there are multiple layers to that where, as the diaphragm is flexed by the voice, it changes the input power, and that is how the signal is read. That's what 48 volt phantom power is. You are giving the system power, essentially, and as you speak into it, it is modulating that and giving you information. So we are going to be demonstrating two different types of microphones here. I do have another microphone that I got. This is also a Behringer product. It's the ECM 8000, but this does a very different thing than any other microphone that I have had, in the sense that this is a measurement microphone. This is a more of a tool than a, well, it's for science, let's say, instead of being for podcasts. But it's still a microphone. So what's interesting about this is it should be almost perfectly flat in its response curve, in its frequency response range. What that means is all microphones, when they're made, the designers get to make choices about how they sound. And the way that they sound is you can tune a microphone to react to certain frequencies in certain ways. This microphone, I believe, is relatively flat. It's just very sensitive and very low noise. So it may be perfect for certain voices or for capturing certain sounds. The Electro Voice is a dynamic microphone, which has an impact, and it has a frequency range, and it has been tuned in certain ways to be a little bit darker, which is to say a warmer, deeper voice that maybe isn't very shrill is going to sound exceptional on that microphone, potentially. Even a voice that may be more shrill, it may counteract that if it's not as sensitive to that. And that is primarily the tuning of the microphone. A microphone like the Shure SM7B is tuned to accentuate lower frequencies. It resonates lower frequencies. When I was looking at microphones, I was trying to avoid that because I believe that would be too much. I would actually have to, if we have an LF detail, a low frequency detail on a channel strip or some type of processor, I would probably be turning that down, or even in post reducing levels for lower frequencies and then boosting higher frequencies. And that's just a process that is done in audio production. In this case, we're doing it live with this channel strip, which is very nice. You can do it in OBS. There are filters that you can apply, and it does give you some control. Almost everything we've done here, I believe you can do. In fact, it looks like everything here should be doable. There's just combination. This is kind of a quality of life tool because there's combined functions to a lot of these different things that makes it a little bit easier to handle. So why don't we take a look at this new microphone. I'll just slide this to the top of the frame, and I'll get this keyboard hopefully out of frame there. Okay, so this came in a nice carrying case. I actually have a carrying case almost identical to this for a pair of pencil microphones. They're kind of like a shotgun microphone, but they are not, they're kind of the shape, but they don't have the same hyper-directional characteristics, but they're still useful. So this case is very similar to the one that the Samson microphones came in, which is not a complaint. It's still a nice case. So it's a hard case with nicely cut inner foam. This is it's not like a styrofoam, it's like the permanently squishy type, which is nice. And then there's a kind of an open cell foam maybe at the top there. So we have this microphone in here, and it's kind of a peculiar shape. I imagine it's so that it can compensate and have its neutral flat frequency But we also get this tiny, adorable little foam windscreen, which looks like it would actually be a little bit tricky to install. But we'll squeeze it on there. We might as well have a little bit. This feels incredibly cheap. However, I don't believe you would actually use this if you're using this to measure things. So why would you get a measurement microphone? What's the point of it? Well, when people set up speakers, like for a home theater, let's say, they may want to use software to compensate for the deficiencies that almost always exist in audio setups. As you project sound across a room at a given frequency, the sound waves bounce off of walls and different surfaces and may reach your ears at a time when other sound waves are. And they can have a destructive effect where they cancel each other out and then you aren't hearing it. Basically, the amplitude peak has no, there's no potential to the next one because it never dips down. It just stays at the same level, so you never hear a change. And that can have a muddy effect to sound. It can add distortions. You can be missing frequency ranges. So that's why they do frequency sweeps a lot of times. That's why the like the THX sound is like that, because it's a frequency sweep in essence. It's almost a speaker test. Now, having a very flat microphone is incredibly useful for something like that because you can trust this. It is a reference tool, and you can know that the sound that is coming out of this is interpretable by software. It is an expected value. You can trust that it's accurate. Now, what people do is they'll use software that can interpret the information from the microphone, and it can say, hey, at this exact position, at this exact frequency, we have a problem. I am getting a drop in amplitude, probably because the sound is bouncing off a wall and hitting me at an inopportune time. So what you can do with a tool like this, combined with software, is tune your stereo image to compensate for things like that. It will boost levels, it will drop levels, and try to get your speakers flatter. And I believe it can also compensate for those secondary bounce sounds. If you don't have a really well-treated space, this can be a lifesaver and help you set up a good sounding audio system. But what I'm curious is, what does it sound like if we set it up through a channel strip and speak into it as if this were a podcast or narration? This is relatively cheap. I think this is $30-ish or so, which in the microphone world is incredibly cheap. If you've ever looked at any name brand, game branded or podcast branded type microphone, those typically decent ones start around $100, maybe cap off around $400 or more, and then the sky's the limit after that. So if you can use something like this channel strip to tune a cheap but reliable microphone, you might have a winner. You might have something that really, really works for you. And so far, I think I've proven that this Rode NT1 can be tuned to sound quite good, and it already sounds quite good. It picks up a lot of information. However, we're not in a controlled studio. I have background noise. There is a computer, if I really turn things up, that you could probably hear. So this is not a perfect studio space where this microphone really, really shines. So let's continue on. What I will do here is turn off the phantom power to this microphone which will essentially mute the microphone, and then I will swap to this other microphone, and I'm doing that so that you're not hearing the audio pops as these XLR cables get unplugged. Right quickly before I do that, though, I will take a picture of the channel strip. And I will just pop in here, add a little scribble of NT1. I believe that's what this microphone's called. It should be. I think the NTG is their shotgun version. But so I will sort of get a couple things set up a little bit to try to minimize the amount of time that you can't hear. And I think that's about as far as I've gotten. So you'll hear things go quiet briefly. I might as well go to mynoise.net, and I will pick out the Japanese Garden, and we will play that as a little dub over. So, I believe you can actually hear me still, even though I've turned that off. So let me... Alrighty, so we are back, and I will just pause the desktop audio for myself there. We are back on the Behringer microphone now, the ECM 8000. And I've turned off the audio processing on this channel strip. So we have our process bypass pressed in, and listening to the levels, I think we're actually at a relatively similar range as to the Rode NT1. So that is perfectly fine. Listening to it, it seems to have a lot of directionality to the microphone. So it's probably a much tighter pattern than the NT1, obviously, and that can be due to its tuning, its shape. So that may be a little bit important here. It may act a little bit more like a shotgun microphone, where you kind of point it at a particular sound and it somewhat isolates the rest. That would make a lot of sense, given the fact that it's more of a measurement tool than a podcasting microphone. So I'm actually going to set this up to account for that. And I'm going to move it a little bit more in front of my face so that it's kind of catching the cone, as it were, of where my sound is coming from, so I can speak a little bit more directly into it. Because as I kind of turn away, it seems to have a lot of side rejection, potentially. So we're at a decent level right now. I'm going to dial back the relevance settings. I'm going to keep kind of the timing and the ratios that I like, but I'm going to turn these thresholds down. So I'll turn the drive down on the compressor, the threshold down on the expander gate. I think we won't need to touch the gain output quite yet. It seems I actually need to turn the input gain up a tiny bit now that I've moved the microphone a little bit farther away. And that's having an effect here. And then I will definitely turn off both the, I think we can leave the de-esser at 4,000, but we'll turn the threshold off. And the LF detail and the HF detail, we will turn those both all the way off. And I think we're ready to turn the processing back on. So it sounds like our levels dropped a little bit. That's probably because I had the gain output, the final output, at a lower level. So now we're back and taking a look at this mic. Okay, so let's start from the left at the compressor and we will carry on. We know we have a density, which is essentially the release time, and there's probably some other functions kind of built in there. And we have that at a decent range. So now we're just going to adjust our drive. And what I'm personally looking for is to see it activate with a -3 as I am talking. And looking at my levels on OBS I just clipped, because we're raising those minimum levels as we apply makeup gain in this drive function, because we are reducing the peaks. So taking a look at it, I don't want to turn this up too much as it will clip things quickly. So I'm going to turn down my gain output to compensate, so that I'm not absolutely blasting everybody's ears. But I'm really looking for kind of the negative. This is all negative here, but the 3 to 6, the 3 to slightly light up as I talk, and then maybe the 6 to kind of pop in as needed. And that's just where I'm going to set it. You could certainly find other guides to make that work better for you. I'm turning down this gain output now as I've set my levels here that I'm pretty happy with. And I'm looking at my OBS output and I'm targeting probably the -17 range or so as a healthy talking volume. It gives me just a little bit of headroom to work with. So now we know we have a decent signal carrying on here, so we'll look at this de-esser. I am aware that my S frequency is most prevalent around 4,000 hertz, so I have that preset here. And now I'm going to adjust this threshold until I see the green light start to have an effect, and maybe occasionally the red light as I make sounds like a snake. In our previous testing, I found on the Rode NT1 that I didn't really want to go above 1.5 here, as it started to sound a little bit unnatural as it was really clamping down on adjacent frequencies, which of course you can tune this. So if I raise this up, maybe it has less of an effect, and it targets a specific frequency. 4,000 to 8,000 I think is kind of an approximate range for S sounds. It is person dependent. So if you have it at a lower frequency, you may inadvertently affect other frequencies. So you may adjust that as well as your threshold. So I'm going to bring this back down to around 1.5, keeping this roughly around 4. Your mileage will vary there. Now we have our enhancer. We have our low frequency and our high frequency detail enhancement. And on the Rode NT1, that really had a nice effect. We used a little bit of the LF detail and a little bit of the HF detail. On my other channel strip, the DBX286, combined with the Electro Voice RA20, it was like magic. So I'm excited to see how this goes with the Behringer. So we'll adjust our LF detail. So this is going to boost primarily the low frequencies. And I'm hearing a little bit of an effect, but I'm going to slide the monitoring a little bit more over to the microphone so I can hear that a little bit more carefully. And we'll keep adjusting this up as I'm speaking. And you can absolutely hear an effect, but it's very, well, I just adjusted the wrong knob. That's probably why. We'll keep boosting the enhancer here. And now we are having a much more dramatic effect. So obviously way too much bass has been added in here, and it's not very natural sounding to my voice. However, for your voice, adjust it as you wish, or for whatever you're running through the channel strip. Could be an instrument. So I'm going to dial this back to a level that kind of sounds nice, and to me that is typically when it starts having an effect, and then somewhere in the range there. I don't want to go way past that because it sounds very unnatural to me, though your mileage will vary. So for me, I think again we're kind of sitting around 4. Now let's look at the high frequency detail. So as I adjust this up, the sibilances get a lot more prevalent, our S's get a lot more prevalent, and all the brittle, bright sounds in the background have gotten a lot more audible. You may or may not want that. If you had a dark microphone, a very warm, very boomy microphone plugged in here, you may use the high frequency detail a lot to bring back some of the brightness and openness, airiness of a microphone, or introduce it to a microphone that does not capture it very well. In this case, I don't particularly want much of that, so I'm sitting around 2.5, 2.25 to 2.5 on the high frequency detail. Now we'll look at the expander / gate, and this is mostly a threshold to the background sound to give things an opportunity that are quieter to be completely cut from the feed, or at least significantly reduced. So we will dial this up. You can see it starting to engage here. I'm kind of at the cusp of the background sounds. Just a little bit is speaking through. I can also move to a farther speaking position as if I were leaned away from the microphone. And that's a potential scenario where you may be speaking and you don't want your voice getting cut off in an unnatural way. So I think I need to go a little bit above that to have a little bit stronger effect. Now I'll move back again, and speaking out here, I get cut off a little bit, but it's not too terrible. You can also play with your ratio here. So a stronger ratio seems to have a much quicker attack and release. So the sound comes in quicker and it is faster to go away. To me, that combined with the amount of reduction that it's also applying, in this case, sounds unnatural to me. Essentially, the way you can hear it is the background is cutting in and out very, very quickly, and it sounds kind of choppy. So I've been using fairly low ratios here so that it attacks in and releases slower, and then the actual amplitude reduction in the background is not as much, and I don't think it's completely reducing it. So it really isn't particularly reducing it very much. Okay, now we're back to our gain output, and really when we addressed the compressor here, that was probably going to be our primary effect that would need adjusting back at the output gain, though potentially your LF and HF detail may affect that. in general. It may boost more than you need, and you may adjust that as you will. So now we are speaking on the Behringer ECM 8000. I'm going to double check. Yes, the ECM 8000. This is a measurement microphone. It has a very flat frequency response, but I was curious if you had this microphone going through a channel strip processor, could it somewhat hold up to other microphones? And I really do think it is. This sounds quite decent, in fact. Obviously there's some background threshold that's kind of clipping through, so I may dial that up a little bit more. That is just the result of being in a noisy environment like I am currently. Unfortunately, I cannot turn that fan off because I would die. It's a little bit too hot today. But for what I believe is a $30 microphone, we really are doing quite well for ourselves here. So let me just check a current price from the same website that I purchased this from. So this is currently out of stock, but it is showing it for $26 on a website that I typically use. So there's nothing in here in the specs that I'm seeing to be particularly of note, except that it is saying it's a true omnidirectional polar pattern. As far as I know, omnidirectional is just going to be picking up sounds all the way around, whereas a cardioid microphone, let me unfortunately it is the end of the week and I'm a little bit slower with my brain at the moment, but cardioid should be the pickup pattern for other microphones. Okay, yes, so cardioid would be like the Rode NT1, where it is going to pick up the most sound directly in front, and then it is going to have a reduced pickup all the way to the sides and at the back. That helps with rejecting and reducing other sounds. So if you have a keyboard, a mouse, a PC with noisy fans, let's say, that will help to kind of reduce that a little bit. Now we do have another option here, and I am having a lot of fun setting these microphones up, so we may take a look at my Samsung microphone. This is the Samsung Son, S-O-N. Perhaps you can see that there if I get out of frame. A little bit. So that is Samsung, not Samsung. It is the CO2 microphone. This is a small condenser microphone. And I'll bring up some information. It is sold as a pack of 2. If I type things correctly, I will get better results. These are sold as pairs, and they're meant to be used together. This type of microphone would be almost the big version of this XY capsule on the Zoom here, the Zoom H5, where you would have 2 of these and you can direct them to have different stereo images. And you can also use these for some fascinating things where, let's say you're recording an acoustic guitar, you can place these in different spots and mix them together to create an interesting, wider image than just one mono microphone or a stereo microphone, omnidirectional. There's so many different patterns and configurations, but why don't we try this out? This would be an example of a slightly larger diaphragm, I believe, than what we have been listening to on this Behringer mic. So I would be curious to see how these compare. I will mute briefly, and I will be right back. Okay, now we are back and we are on the Samson microphone. These are sold as a pair, as I was saying, and they are for recording, but they're not necessarily a measurement microphone like the Behringer that we just looked at. These would be very useful for miking up equipment, but you could potentially use it as just a microphone to speak into, just like you can use almost any microphone. So my levels are a little bit low at the moment, so I'm going to adjust my gain to pick that back up to a healthy range for what I prefer. So we're sitting there now. I'm going to also check my levels here. I was looking at just OBS, and I was happy with that, but I need a stronger signal so that everything else is going to work relatively correctly. So checking this out now, I think right in there will be good, but it's a little bit too hot going into OBS. So I will turn my output gain back down just a little bit. And I think I'm pretty happy with it, where that is. So I made a mistake, and I did not take a photo of how I set up the Behringer microphone, but I don't anticipate using the Behringer all the time in that sense. So that's probably okay. And I can always look back on here. I think I had this same window up. So we'll carry on here. Now we are on the Samson CO2. It is one of a pair, and it is maybe a smaller diaphragm condenser microphone. Yes. Okay, so we have our levels set up reasonably well here, and I believe I have everything else turned off. If I turn the process bypass on, I think the only thing that should affect is the output gain would go back to a neutral position. So we'll turn that off. So now we're applying our only processing, which should be here. Everything else should be turned off. And we will start with our compressor in just 1 second. Okay, so let's dial up our compressor here. I have a density set that I prefer, which is essentially just the attack and release time. And I believe it combines some other functions in there as well. So you just control one knob to get pretty close to a combined function that you may wish for. And what I've been looking for is a reduction occasionally of 3 decibels. And then hitting into the 6 to 9 as I get a little bit louder. And I think right around 2 is looking pretty good. I think for so far for the last two microphones that I looked at, being in the 2 to 2.5 range has been pretty consistent. So I'm sitting kind of right around there at the moment, and I'm pretty happy with that. Density has already been set, so I'm not bothered there. We can look at our de-esser. I tend to sit around 4,000 hertz for my S's, for my sibilant sounds. And we're going to adjust this threshold until it is reducing the S sounds, but it's not affecting too much else. You can look at your little readout here, and having the 1 decibel reduction, having it active is completely fine, but I don't want it active all the time. So it's clipping in just a little bit. It's kind of pushing over that threshold with the fan noise in the background. So I have a couple of options. I could adjust my frequency to capture a different range, and that may work a little bit better. But my S's, they're strongest at a certain point. So if that's 4,000 kilohertz, I think it really is. Unfortunately, for me, that is affecting some of my background noise. And when you cut in and out the background noise or the room tone very frequently, it becomes very noticeable, even if it's something fairly quiet. So I do have to play with that a little bit. I don't think I can adjust my frequency too much, so I have to reduce the threshold and just not have the impact be quite as aggressive. And looking at this, it is a slight reduction, and I think we're looking at around 1.8 to 2 here for a decent natural sounding effect here. Now we'll look at our enhancer. I'm going to dial up the LF, or the low frequency detail, and as we're dialing this up, I'm just listening to the bass and trying to find out when things are getting a little bit too much. And I would say around 7 it was starting to become too much, and 10 is extremely boomy. Well, not extremely boomy, it's much more boomy and a little bit loud. Looking back at OBS here, I need to adjust my output gain a little bit back down because we added in our compression, and that would have lifted our levels. So I should have done that earlier, should have checked that, but it was okay. We weren't clipping there yet. So listening to the LF detail, I'm going to dial my mix from my headphones a little bit over there so I can hear a little bit better. 10 is quite a bit too much. I've been sitting kind of around 4 to 6 depending on the microphone, and listening to this, I think it needs a little bit more, so I might actually sit closer to that 7, and it sounds pleasant to my ears there. Now we'll look at high frequency detail. So as we tune that up, all the bright kind of airy sounds, the fan noise in the background, anything in the higher frequency range is getting a boost. And as I dial this all the way up, the background fan noise has gotten incredibly loud. And now that it's so strong with my voice, my de-esser is probably taking out huge chunks of my voice, and that's the cut in and cut out that is much, much too strong. It also sounds way too bright and brittle, so I'm going to dial that back a bunch, but it can be useful. It introduces a little bit more top end to the microphone, and could be useful for what you have going on. I think I'm going to drop, I want a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to go much above 2 here. I think that sounds fairly pleasant. Now we'll look at the expander and gate, and that is essentially a noise gate for the background audio. And I will just dial up this threshold until when I stop talking, it starts to have an effect, and you can watch your negative, which would be when it's starting to reduce volume. And this, the threshold works in conjunction with the ratio, but I have a ratio kind of already set that I like, so I'm just adjusting the point at which this is clipping in and out. So that seems reasonably good. What I like to do is also sit back to like a farther speaking position and have a listen to this. And it doesn't seem to be clipping my voice out too significantly. These other two microphones that I used really were at this kind of similar range and for how it sounds. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised by that. Now, if I increase my ratio, a few things may become apparent. Going back to that same speaking position, it may have a much stronger effect here. If I monitor that for myself, I can hear it a little bit better. So it does have that effect where it's now cutting me in and out a lot more aggressively. So you would definitely need to stay in a better speaking range of your microphone. Now, I don't need that to be as aggressive because its attack and release is also much faster at the higher ratio. So it's applying more and it seems to turn it on and off much quicker, which to me doesn't sound very natural. So I will bring this back down to the range that seemed reasonable to me. And then I found the point at which the background noise is sometimes being clipped and sometimes not. So the threshold, it's on the threshold essentially. And then I've moved that up just a little bit so there's some margin there to where the background noise is being cut away. And because we have a ratio relatively low, it's not ducking the background noise all the way. If I look at my OBS levels, it is actually dropping it all the way down to 0. So nothing from the background when I am quiet is getting transmitted. That can be very nice. To me, it's still sounding relatively natural, though there is a little bit of cut in and out. So you may adjust that up if that's what you need, or you may adjust it down or tweak your ratio a little bit. Now, looking at my output levels for the output gain, at this point, we've already adjusted this and it was working fine because we adjusted it after we affected the compressor and it lifted our levels back up. So I am quite happy with what we have going on here. The monitor levels, I can just adjust back to a range that seems to be mixing the desktop sound and the direct monitoring of this microphone. I'm actually fairly impressed with this microphone. It sounds quite good. Very clean sound. I sound very natural. It's not influencing my voice too much, which is pretty much what this microphone is for. It's not a podcasting microphone. It's not meant for broadcast. You could probably use it for singing, but it's maybe not going to capture all the detail that maybe a Rode NT1 or the NT1S, the other variant of the NT1 that is a little bit brighter. So that's kind of an interesting comparison to these other microphones. So I have saved the best for last, the thing that I am most excited for, which is the Electro Voice RE20. This is my main microphone. I use this on my editing rig upstairs for voice chat, voiceovers, whatever have you, and it runs through a DBX286 channel strip. That channel strip is analog. I need to find out for sure if this channel strip is. So I will look at the Ultra Voice UV1 on my preferred website here, which of course it is still special order. I just barely managed to get mine. And taking a look through here, I am not seeing mention of it being analog. So I'll just bring up a large Okay, so you can have an analog output from the outputs at the back, but you would obviously have a digital output for USB, which that's completely fine. I'm just curious if the processing is digital or if it's analog. And it's not immediately clear. So I am suspicious that it is digital. I would think that would be cheaper, and that's why the price of this could come into a range that is as affordable as it is. It's roughly $180 US, let's say. So that's interesting. I still need to do a little bit more research because the DBX286 is an analog channel strip. And I am of the belief that that is going to be some of the reasons why I like the way it sounds so much paired with the Electro Voice. Why don't we swap over to that now? So we have the Samsung, and I may actually use this in the future to compare with. So I will take a quick picture of my settings. And the easiest thing may be to actually drag this microphone into frame as you hear all of the horrible sounds that has caused. Okay, I'm going to mute briefly and we will swap out these microphones. Check. And we are back. So I have swapped over to the Electro Voice RA20. This does have a pop filter set up. It is on a mic stand. This is going to be probably my streaming microphone down here as much as it can be. I have purchased a separate shock mount, which should let me essentially unplug this and take it back upstairs as is desired. So I have my gain all the way up, and it's the same way for my DBX286. This is a dynamic microphone, so it produces its own signal based on the strength of the sound. It generates an electric signal off of the sound, whereas the condenser microphone that we looked at has to use phantom power. And phantom power is essentially power for that type of microphone, though really it is it applies voltage, and then the voice is varying that voltage, and that's how you get your signal out of it. I am kind of curious where that... Okay, so I had my cable here resting on the arm, and as I tapped on the desk, it was vibrating. I was like, that shock mount's not doing a very good job, but when I isolate that, it is doing a great job. So this microphone is relatively quiet, and it requires a fair bit of gain to boost its levels to an audible level. So I do actually have the gain completely maxed out. Now, we aren't quite reaching on our levels gauge here a perfect level, which we've been assuming is 0, and I'm assuming that is they've just changed the scale, and that is negative 12 to give you a little bit of headroom. So it does some of the thinking for us with that little setup, and we don't have to find a negative 12 signal. We just shoot for 0 in this case, but that is not 0 in the traditional sense of it is clipping at 0. So we are sitting at negative 6, and we are not necessarily a solid negative 6. And if I just adjust a little bit more here, I do tend to speak into this microphone actually from a pretty close level, so I can lower my overall gain and quieten my background. I typically have a fan running or maybe an AC. So we will try to get in a relatively kind of expected use case here to give this a fair shot. So I would adjust my output gain here to raise the levels for OBS, but that is not affecting the input gain. The input gain needs to be at a relatively healthy level so that every channel function here on this channel strip is operating in its proper way. So that is curious to see. As far as I understand, I haven't tested them back to back, but the Electro Voice its signal is a little bit stronger than the Shure SM7B, which is a very popular voiceover microphone or podcast microphone. And that's important to know because this channel strip may not power the SM7B enough to get a live output out of it. Now, a lot of people do purchase cloud lifters, which that may just be a brand name or the specific function, but it is just like a clean gain amplifier, and it raises your gain levels. Now, that is literally no different than going into your video editing software, your audio recording software, your DAW or whatever, and normalizing and adding gain to another level. It is literally no different. In fact, it may be cleaner to do it that way because you're not adding in more chances for the electronics to add in noise. So a cloud lifter is a very expensive solution, but when you need live levels and you need live processing, you may not have a choice there. I don't know that you're able to adjust too much. However, looking in OBS real quick, why don't we swap scenes? I am keen to see if there's just a gain. Yes, there is. So if you had a Shure SM7B, just go into OBS, open your gain, and crank that thing. What I've done here is I've added 8.3 decibels. Now I'm having to talk a little bit quieter because we have so much extra gain. I will turn that off now, and now I'm much quieter, so I have to speak kind of at a more normal volume, which is perfectly fine for me. I have enough headroom here where I'm just about in an okay range that I think everything on this channel strip will work okay with the RE20. Probably not so well with the SM7B. I don't know that these channel functions are going to do what they're supposed to do in the same way, but I do have my output gain here that I can adjust if I turn off my process bypass, and we can adjust that back to healthy levels. I've added in about 6 decibels there. We're going to set that back to a neutral position. Let me adjust the mix to hear myself a little bit better, and we're going to run through all these functions on the Behringer Ultra Voice UV1 channel strip with an Electro Voice RE20. So already we have had to set, and let me restart that so we get a better take with both cameras. So we're going to take a look at the Behringer Ultra Voice UV1 when paired with the Electro Voice RE20. We've already set in our gain. Every other function is off, and we are sitting a little bit low. We want to be sitting at about -12, or what is scaled here at 0. And we're sitting about -6 to 0, or maybe not even a very strong -6. So we're a little bit quiet. And you want this input gain to be right around 0, because that is what is required for all of your other functions to operate properly. I think we're going to be okay sitting a little bit low, but if you use a quieter microphone like the Shure SM7B, then you may have problems if you don't have a cloud lifter. But I was demonstrating how you can just add gain in OBS and you don't need a cloud lifter. It's a kind of a waste of money, in my opinion. So going through here now, we will start with our compressor, and I have a preferred density already set up. So now I'm just dialing up the drive to see around 3-ish decibels light, the first light, to kind of start ticking in. And what this has done is lowered our peaks to the wave, to the audio, and added in the makeup gain with this combination drive function. So you have heard me get louder, and we've also heard the background get louder because we have technically added gain here. Now looking at my output, I'm running a little bit hot, so I'm going to dial that back. We'll take off, that's maybe 5 decibels or so, and we're sitting kind of around the -17, -18 range, which is kind of where I've been settling lately. And it seems like that's a very reasonable level. So under normal speaking conditions, we are getting a little bit of compression, and as I get louder, we're seeing much more significant gain reduction, to the point that it is having a really good effect so far. Even though our input is a little bit low, that setting is sounding very natural, and I really am happy with that. Our levels are also coming out on point, so that's very, very exciting. Okay, we'll look at the de-esser next. This helps to reduce the sibilant sounds, your S's, your C's, and the specific frequency for you will be different. It's different from person to person. Roughly 4,000 to 8,000 hertz will be the range. I think I sit around 4,000 hertz, which is a little bit frustrating because there are a lot more sounds in my voice at 4,000, and even background sounds. So I have to be very careful with this threshold because it can have a very major effect on the overall sound. So as I dial this up, I'm looking for my indicator here with the 1, which will be a green light to start ticking over. The second light is the 6. I believe that stands for 6 decibels of reduction here, and that is going to be a fairly aggressive sound when you're at 4,000 hertz. Now, if I set this up towards 8,000 hertz, it may not be as aggressive because it's targeting a different frequency range, though in this particular case, it still sounds a little bit aggressive, but it's not dealing with the S sounds like it should be. So for me, that's roughly around 4,000 hertz, and it's still too aggressive at the roughly 2 mark. So I'm going to dial that back to around 1.5, and that sounds more reasonable. It's taking a little bit of the edge off the S's and the C's, but it's not too terrible. Now onto the enhancer. So on the enhancer, we have the low frequency detail and the high frequency detail. These are basically EQ adjustments, but they do perform additional functions. Typically, most of these knobs are kind of combined functions to give you a little bit of quality of life so that you don't have to dial in a whole lot. A little bit of it is built in and somewhat automatic. So as we dial up our low frequency detail, you will hear some more boominess and some more bass in the microphone. Pardon me. And as we really dial that up, it gets extremely strong, way too strong for my preference. However, depending on your voice, depending on your microphone, you may want that headroom. This would be a very traditional, boomy, kind of sounding broadcast, and maybe even too much. If you had the Shure SM7B on this, that microphone is tuned to really, really boost bass frequencies, and it would probably be absolutely overwhelming in this case. And I am seeing this get a little bit too much, around 6 on this dial. So for my preference, I would probably sit around 4. And for me, that's when it's starting to be noticeable, but not terribly strong. Now we'll look at our high frequency detail. As I dial this up, you'll hear a little bit more top end come into the microphone. Things will sound a little bit more open, a little bit more airy, and bright sounds become a lot more apparent. The fan in the background has become much more noticeable. Static has become much more noticeable, and sibilances have also become overwhelming. And this is already at 5. If we quickly go to 10 here, it is useless. I would not want to use that. This microphone is a little bit darker, being that it is a broadcast dynamic microphone. It is built to be that way, but it's not too dark. So I, for my preference, probably don't want a whole lot of the high frequency detail. So I may stick around 1.5 there. Now looking at the expander / gate, I have a ratio that I've set up here that seems to work well. So now we're just going to tune in the threshold, and we're basically looking for the background noise to go away and to kind of sit right on that threshold. So right around there, both lights are flashing when I am quiet. So the background noise is right at that level. I want to go above that level with just a little bit of margin. So I will dial that up past and double check. So it is completely removing the sound from the fan. Now to adjust how quickly and how much it does that, you will dial the ratio. If I dial this way up, it has a much quicker release from my voice, and it comes in much quicker as I am speaking, as far as I can tell through my ears. That doesn't sound very natural to me. It's too quick. So I tend to sit in the lower range of this, where it's a little bit smoother, a little bit more gradual on and off. And it's also not reducing the background quite as much, though here, as I completely go quiet, there is nothing being transmitted to OBS. So back to our gain output, we adjusted this to compensate for the compressor, and that worked wonders for us. Looking at it again, I think we could still be a tiny bit hot, and that could be from the low frequency or high frequency enhancements that we did. Though likely that would not be from our de-esser or gate. So your first and third functions will likely adjust your gain by a tiny amount. So it's good to always go back to your gain output and adjust it back to a reasonable level. So this is the Behringer Ultra Voice UV1 paired with the Electro Voice RE20, and it does sound quite nice. I think this is a very, very usable sound, though I will have to do a direct comparison to my DBX286, maybe run it through a full setup again and make sure everything is just as I want it, and then compare back to back. I think without comparing back to back, I prefer the DBX286. I will do my research to verify this claim, but I am fairly sure this is not an analog channel strip. though I may be wrong. It does say it has an analog output, but I don't know that the functions are analog. I would be very impressed, as it seems that may be too good to be true for the price. The DBX286 is an analog channel strip. I do believe that introduces some nice qualities to the way I sound with this microphone. So as it is, this is still a very, very good output with these two paired up. And I think it's completely usable, especially if I was in a more sound treated space. Currently, there's maybe not too much reverb, but it is there is basically no dampening going on or any kind of absorption. So it's a very not resonant, but there is something going on there. And then obviously I have the fan in the background as well. Just the time of year I do need that. So this has been an interesting look. I'm not blown away by this pairing like I was with the 286, and I will have to do some proper back-to-back testing. It does seem like we get similar input levels. That'll be something to look at for sure. Making, I believe the DBX286 could sit just shy of fully maxed out and be kind of in a decent range, but I do max it out. So definitely I will compare those two. I'm very excited to see. I don't think this is going to replace my DBX286, because just listening in the headphones, I don't think it's quite the sound that I want, the sound that I was getting out of the 286, and that's okay. Though you can find something to pair this with and be very happy. I just have a particular, I've been spoiled at this point, essentially. So this may work exceptionally well for you. This is giving me a lot of headroom with my compressor. I am happy to have a little bit of de-essing. The enhancements are very nice. I'm glad to have a threshold, and I'm getting really good output levels from this microphone. So this is still an exceptional option in the budget category for anybody that is making videos, live streaming, voiceovers, any kind of audio work, because it lets you do all of these functions. It has direct monitoring built in, and you can output. It is also a desktop audio interface. There are some nice quality of life features as well, like your on and off button. Potentially your cable routing is up front. That may be preferable to you. So that is lovely to see. But me personally, until I really do my back-to-back testing, I don't think this is going to beat my 286. So I will be keeping my 286 and the audio interface that I have to pair with it, because unfortunately the 286 does not have your direct monitoring built in or your desktop audio interface. So that has been a little bit of a letdown for me. I was really, really excited. However, this is still going to make an excellent channel strip processor for the stream. So I will be able to have this set up and have my microphone running into it. It is only one input. It is a mono channel strip. So if I wanted to have another microphone, I would need to have a second. And if I had, I guess, well, stereo would be two inputs. So if I have another microphone somewhere in this room, another space that I go to and sit at to work on projects, I may need to acquire a second one of these if I want to have a really nice setup. Though I do have my Zoom H5, which does have some built-in functions. It does have a compressor that I know of and a limiter. So I could do a little bit there with the live side. Also, OBS has its functions as well. So taking a look here, you can go to your mic, down to filters, and you can add them as to your heart's content. We have equalization, compression and expander, gain, invert polarity, limiter noise gate, noise suppression, upward compressor, and the VS22. I don't know if that's stock. That may not be stock since it says plugin. But I would likely see people using the compressor, the limiter, the noise gate, or noise suppression. The noise suppression effectively works as a noise gate with one of its higher quality settings. And likely, potentially the expander. So you could very well use those functions, and as long as you're getting a somewhat usable input into OBS, those will function quite well and do pretty much everything that this channel strip does. But what's nice for me is I don't have to touch those. I can dial it in right here. I have more control and customization on here. And in the case of the DBX286, it being analog has a little bit of, I believe it's saturation that is going on, and that works lovely with this microphone's sound. So this is very exciting for me. I'm glad to have this set up down here now. I can just take my microphone to whichever place I'm working at or speaking at, and now I can have two setups that work quite well. So last stream, we looked at this microphone arm from Neewer, and it's a little bit of a different style. I believe I heard someone mention that it was similar to the Elgato Wave. I'm gonna just take a look at that. We do have, just go to the main cam here. So, Elgato Wave, if I spell this correctly. Looks like I have. So they have a few options here. I'll just bring this up and we'll take a look at it. So the Elgato Wave, they have a variety of options, and pricing actually isn't too bad. They have, like, it looks like maybe this stock version has a taller section kind of at the start, whereas this version does not. They also have just a desktop stand. And then obviously their microphones. The one that I purchased was a Neewer brand, Neewer. I think it's 2 E's. And that's the one that we looked at last stream. And I was impressed by it. I was trying to get away from the kind of the scissor boom arm configuration of a, like a traditional mic stand. Actually, looking at this particular angle, I'm having to chase the microphone because the weight is offset enough that it's moving on me. I don't know. I think you could adjust some of those things. I believe there is. They did come with some Allen keys that are actually decently nice. You could reuse these for a long time. So I believe that should clip into there quite well. So I'm going to tighten this one up. Just verify that this is affecting that. And it seems to be. Now we'll move this back where it was. Kind of out here. Okay, now it's staying. So I just had that dialed in. Not quite dialed in yet. So the microphone was running away from me. But so far, it's kind of a mixed bag. I've had it for a day or so. And I do like it. It's very stable. It was relatively affordable as well, which is nice. To be expected from the brand, though. It does have nice XLR cable routing clips. And there goes the microphone again. I think you can adjust each set screw, so I should be able to kind of tweak it further back here to work a little bit better for me. But that's a little bit of an oddity, having it run away like that. But you should be able to adjust that a little bit. I am on a folding desk. This is obviously not the best setup to have a mic stand on, but it's what I'm working with at the moment. But I do like this reasonably well, though I don't know if it's going to replace the Rode PSA boom arm that I have upstairs. That's what I was really excited to see. Mostly because I would prefer to have the height adjustment near the base, almost like a boom arm in a way. I would like it to be higher, potentially, and then come over. However, it does come back a fair bit the way I have it set up now. And I'm just considering my desk setup with my mouse upstairs. The mouse mat is almost this size. It's just a little bit squarer. So my thought is, what I don't like about the Rode arm, even though it's much better than my last one, is when the knuckle comes up at the top and then it comes back out. The reach is fine, but that obscures a little bit of my view of my monitor, like mostly the bottom right corner. If I adjust it, then it obscures the view of my hand. Now, I don't need to see my mouse necessarily. My hand will be on my mouse. But that is a little bit frustrating. The hope was with this, being that it doesn't have to come up to reach out, that it may work reasonably well. And at first I was thinking that I wanted the height adjust, as I was saying a minute ago, near the front, but I think that might actually put this into my view more. I think this is more low slung, and if I set this close enough, it should be able to stick forward, then over, come up and back to me. So it kind of cuts around my mouse pad upstairs, and I think that may actually work. So I might move this upstairs and move the Rode down here to use to make sure I get the best experience in the place that I spend most of my time. But aside from it slowly sliding away from me every second or so, because everything's at a slight tilt here with this desk, I am quite happy with it. So now we've set up the RE20 reasonably well, and I think this is actually going to get fairly annoying chasing this mic down. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can tighten this up. The set screws you can assemble. Like they come all the way out so they can ship this in a smaller package. And when I set these, I did not really tighten them all the way because it looks like it just interfaces with something plastic and not actually on the metal. So I'm assuming that's like a friction interface so that things can be kind of dialed in. It's either that or it is just to prevent it from coming apart and not necessarily meant to be tightened all the way. But I'm going to keep tightening this for a little while and hopefully see an effect here. Because for the meantime, it's a little bit annoying having it kind of run away from me like it has been. I think I have tightened it a little bit, and that might just be in a range that I can handle now. So I don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to open up this last package and at least have that. I think it's the final part of an order that I made recently for a few upgrades, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited to show you guys and explain why it is so useful to me. So I think we'll move back to the second, or have the two cams set up. So let me just slide that out of the way. This thing keeps running away, so maybe we'll arrange it a little bit differently, and we'll swap cams, get the keyboard out of the way here, and we're just gonna have to live with some of these cables that are kind of in our way at the moment. Let me go grab this box. I'll be right back. And this is the big box. Can actually frame that pretty well. This, well, I'll open it and then I'll talk about it. This is going to be fairly hard to open, but I guess we'll just clear our tape from the end here, and hopefully that works. And I think it's a box inside of a box, though I may be mistaken. Yes, it is. Let me pull this box out now. Ooh. For some reason it started to feel heavier. It's just a little bit denser. So this, let me flip this all the way around so you're facing the right way, is the professional lighting. Well, professional lighting supports from Manfrotto. I bought this used, as you probably saw from the sticker, so we will need to inspect the condition of it. But I already have a different brand. I don't believe it's from Manfrotto, though I think it is also an Italian brand. But if this is all in the condition that I hope it is, with all the relevant parts and functions, I did get it for a fairly decent price, which I'm very excited about. These do end up being fairly expensive. Maybe the cost of a decent tripod, nothing too extravagant, but just kind of a relatively decent one. All right, we have some accessories in the bag still. Couple clips, and it looks like we have a tension knob, which is probably removed from shipping for shipping reasons, so we will get that installed. Let me slide this back here. I am curious. So it does seem like there's a fair bit of noise picked up from taps on the desk. Let me take the microphone out of the boom arm. I will just hand hold it here. Yes, so there's a lot of sound being transmitted through this boom arm. That may actually change my vote for this going upstairs on the desk, because as I know it, the stand upstairs does not do that. So taps on the desk on this particular, I mean, this is a plastic folding table. It's a hollow chamber basically. But that is a fair bit. It could be the shock mount. Maybe a better shock mount would work better, but I do have the same shock mount more or less upstairs. So that's a little bit frustrating that I will have to do some more testing on that as if I end up doing a more in-depth review on this. But just pulling this out here, this is the tensioning knob on this mechanism. When it is shipped, it looks like it just has a retainer to hold the hardware together, but they can ship it tighter if they keep this knob off. So what the heck is this thing anyway? What does it do? Well, it's essentially a light stand with a boom arm that you mount to a wall. It can fold out of the way when you're not in use, and there's a decent amount of flexibility with its reach and height adjustments. So if I can kind of give you a full view, I think we'll swap to the main cam. That should be a full view here. So this can, with this lever adjusted, mounted to a wall, this would be fully folded up. This can pivot. Of course, not mounted to a wall, it's a little bit harder. So it can pivot up like that, and then you can lock it in a position. And then on this other end, oh, we're dropping things. Which, my clip broke. One of my little cable running clips, that's okay. I have a 3D printer. On this end, you have a holder, which lets you install what I believe is called a baby pin. Now this has a 1/4-20 on one side, and it looks like a 3/8 thread on the other. So you'll be able to mount a variety of things. This also has the relevant shape for lights to go on it. So you could mount the webcam like I have up there for our top-down view. That is mounted on a 1/4-20, which is mounted to a boom arm, which is off of a rolling stand back here. So I could mount a camera and be able to position it quite easily. Or I can mount a light. And primarily, I will probably use this for a light. There's 3 positions to this connector at the end. Maybe I can perform a zoom here. But you can see on the end, there's 3 sockets basically to position this at different angles. It doesn't look like you could stick it through to have the 3/8 and the 1/4 sticking through both at once, though I'm sure you could get a custom or longer version that may let you do that. But that's maybe an edge case. So we have a lighting fixture on the end here. We can also extend this out. And to be honest, compared to my other one, I'm a little bit underwhelmed by this. Mostly this clip here. This clip is plastic. Well, the lever is plastic, which that may not be so egregious. Yeah, I'm going to say the lever is plastic. The actual clamp may be metal. So that maybe isn't so bad. Just looking at the finish of it for a minute, I thought it was plastic as well. And I was going to be a little bit upset. But it looks like all the actual real strength required components are metal. Just this one flipping lever is plastic. So that may break on you potentially. A little bit frustrating to see, but it would cost more if it was all metal. Now I have another one of these, and I'll give you a little bit of a view of it here. We will just reach over and steal the top-down camera. And go into portable mode here. So I have the stand mounted to the wall up here, and it runs over and it holds this light, which holds this even light down on the setup. And I got that one used at a local photo store, and it was very reasonably priced. And it was an exceptional deal. So I'm very glad I got that initially, because it has been so incredibly useful. There goes the microphone trying to escape again. I've forgotten that this desk is absolutely horrid for
a desk-mounted microphone stand. We were having problems with this the other stream. But yes, so I can have an overhead boom that is very compact. It keeps everything up and out of the way. The wall basically becomes the C-stand, which that's not going to become a problem for me. It's adjustable via height. And when I am done, I just drop it down to get my light from up there, take my cable off, and I can fold it to the wall there. Now, what I'm thinking of with my new one, which is down here, I could place it above this one. And when I'm done, I should be able to essentially push one to one side and push the other to the other side, and they should fold together and not be getting in any sort of way. So I'm really excited to have another one of these. It costs new maybe as much as a budget C-stand. But that doesn't guarantee you that comes with a boom. So you do, as long as you have a fixed place to work from, you do have quite the opportunity to have a very compact yet functional setup. With that, I think that will do me for the evening. I have a few things going on in the morning, so I'm going to roll off to bed here, but I'm very excited. We have a setup now for our microphone. So now we can use any microphone and have our live processing if we really want to set up and do any gaming here. And then for our general kind of out and about, we'll be able to work that out as well. We have also, as of last stream, gotten a secondary monitor going, so that's been very nice for monitoring everything. We brought in our nicer camera and have it hooked up to the stream, and we are trucking along now with our additional lighting solution that should clear up a little bit more floor space for me to rock and roll in this room and get onto some projects. I think our next projects are probably going to center around restoring vintage camera lenses. There is a lens in particular that I need to dig into to repair. It has a lot of fungus on the glass, and I would like to be able to use that lens. Since I purchased it at a discount price, I'm hoping to do the elbow grease myself and get that all good to go. That will lead into some 3D printing, probably some laser cutting as I get that all set up. And we're going to be designing a large format camera, mostly to experiment with, but if it works out well enough, that may become a feature of these streams. So thank you for sticking around. I appreciate each and every one of you, and have a wonderful evening.